In this video, I'll share tips on painting orchids and roses on a black silk tie, scarf, or black fabric. The same principles apply to painting any flower, fish, leaves, lightning, or anything else on black using fabric paints. Please subscribe to our channel for more videos to come on painting and dyeing silk and other fabrics. Here's a selection of ties I've dyed using silk dyes and resists, salt, sponges, and ice, techniques I'll cover in other videos. The advantage of painting ties rather than dyeing them is it's easy to make the fabric paint permanent by simply ironing them, while dyes get the fabric wet so it shrinks unevenly and may require re-sewing the back to get the tie to lay flat. Painting on black silk creates a beautiful contrast between the rich black background and your colorful paints. I'll show you some time-lapse videos of ties I painted for a wedding and a prom. These Neopaque fabric paints by Jacquard are among the best at covering black fabric. Paints, brushes, ties, and scarves can be ordered from Dharma Trading Company. This rose tie was painted with just 3 colors to match this dress in blue, white, and magenta. On black, the paint will soak in, so you need a very opaque fabric paint, and it will take at least 2 coats to cover the black. While white is the most opaque of paints, with the most pigment, it makes the great first coat as a base for other colors to show up vibrantly against the very black fabric. This is an acrylic fabric paint, so it will cover and hide what you're painting over. So paint the background first, and then the foreground. I found 1 coat of blue wasn't quite enough, and went over it again with a second blue coat. I suggest testing your design on a piece of scrap before you start, because once you get paint on black fabric, it's almost impossible to remove. So make sure your colors and design will turn out as you plan. Also, stir your paint well before you begin painting. For a tie with roses on it, start with the roses in the background and then paint your way to the foreground. Roses are fairly easy to paint. The petals are roughly in concentric circles, larger around the outside, smaller in the middle, sometimes with a spiral. If you're painting fairly small roses like these, don't try to cram in too many petals. Just do as many as you can comfortably fit in the space that you have. Look carefully at photos of real roses and then adapt it to what is actually practical to do with a paintbrush. It's easier to paint fine detail if you have a small enough brush, so you may want a small nylon silk painting brush for painting the base color of each flower, and an even smaller brush to paint the petals. After blending colors with your brush, rinse or wipe it off with a cloth or paper towel before dipping it in pure color again or changing colors. After painting white here and blending it into the pink, I wipe off the brush before dipping it in the white to keep the white pure and maintain enough contrast. Light will hit the outer edges of each petal on a rose, and the deeper parts will be in the shadow. So each petal will be lighter around the outside edge and darker toward the base of the petal. Paint the lighter color for the outside edge of each petal while the base color is still wet, so you can blend it into the base color for a graduated effect. Once you have the effect you want, don't overwork it or you'll lose your contrast. For a light pink rose, start with white and add pink where the shadows are. Then blend each shadow outward, leaving a little bit of pure white for each petal. With most artwork, everything doesn't have to be totally realistic as long as the impression it makes brings to the mind of the viewer what you want to get across. With clothing accessories, colors are very important, and designs can oftentimes be simplified. Once you've mastered painting a front view of roses, which makes them look a little flat, you can make them more three-dimensional by painting each rose from a different angle. Also, adding green leaves behind before you paint the flowers gives them more realism. Most rose petals are slightly wavy around the edges. You can paint them as a smooth, simple curve, but don't make them too perfect or they might not look natural. Some roses have petals with a slight point or a ruffle. But as long as you make the petals concentric but somewhat random and blend each petal from light on the outside to darker toward the middle, it will clearly look like a rose. The shape of orchids and other flowers can be more complex. So you can enlarge photos to make flowers the size you want and cut out stencils of a few flowers that have shapes that you like. After placing the cutout flower where you want it on the tie or scarf, fit the stencil over it, remove the cutout, and paint a coat of white through the stencil. Then remove the stencil and touch up the paint if necessary, as you want the flower shapes to be fairly accurate. The average length of the front of a tied tie is around 16 to 18 inches below the knot, so measure up from the tip of the tie to make sure your design will be where you want it on the front of the tie. Repeat the stenciling until you have enough flowers painted in white. A nice way to make flowers more realistic is to add stems or leaves behind the flowers, so you'll need to paint your base coat in white for those too. We have the basic composition established now with the flowers stenciled and the stems painted in white fabric paint. The colors we paint on now won't soak into the fabric and disappear, but will be vibrant against the black background. We'll paint the stems first, since they are behind the flowers. I didn't buy green paint, so I mixed green from yellow and blue. To preserve paints in a mixing tray until later, you can cover them with plastic wrap so they don't dry out. The Neopaque paints come in 21 colors, but I only needed yellow, red, magenta, blue, and white. The paints mix well to create any other color you need. Jacquard also makes Lumiere metallic or pearlescent paints, and there are other brands as well. Just make sure you get a fabric paint that covers well if you're painting on black. Clean them up with soap and water. Be sure to stir well before painting. Orchids bloom from the bottom up, so there will usually be some unopened buds at the top of the stem. Orchids usually bend over, but to fit the shape of the tie, I arrange them vertically. There's an incredible variety of orchids, and since these ties were for a wedding, I chose a design that would be immediately recognizable as an orchid for the colors of magenta, purple, and blue. Most orchids have 3 sepals in the back, which look like petals, and 2 petals in the front. For enough contrast to be able to see the petals, I painted the 3 sepals first in slightly darker colors, and then the 2 petals lighter. If you accidentally get paint on the outside of the line where you didn't intend to, the easiest thing to do is expand your flower a little bit to include it. The other option, if you get paint on the black fabric where you don't want it, is to immediately dab it with a clean cloth, a Q-tip, or a paper towel with some water, being careful not to disturb the rest of your painting. If there's any color left, touch it up with a black fabric marker. To add a nice texture to the petal, use streaks of lighter and/or darker paint to emphasize the veins of the petal, and brush over them until they are blended just enough to look natural, but not so much that you lose your contrast. This can take some patience and practice. It adds more character to flowers than just solid colors. Other options are to do a smooth blend from one color to another, or to dab the paint with a brush or a small sponge for a speckled pattern. Study photos of the type of flower you want to paint, and figure out how to simplify it enough to get the effect that you want. The center part of orchids can be too complex to accurately paint in detail, so I took some artistic license and simplified them enough that I could paint each one with a tiny brush and still have them look like an orchid. Painting on a black silk scarf is a little different in that there's only one layer of silk with no lining, and you have a lot more space to work with. Although fabric paint stays flexible, it still adds some stiffness to the silk, so try to use as little paint as possible to get the effect you want. I generally prefer to dye scarves, as the dye becomes a part of the fabric, leaving the whole scarf soft and silky. But there are some things you can do with paint that can't be done with dyes, and vice versa. The black silk scarf I got from Dharma Trading is 8 mm habitye, which is lighter weight than the 19 mm black satin used for ties, so the paint soaks partially through to the back side but doesn't look very attractive, so it's best to flip the frame over and paint the back side as well. With this in mind, instead of painting on white first, I just did 2 coats of the colors. One advantage of painting a silk tie rather than dyeing it is that fabric paints are set by ironing, which does not distort the shape of the tie at all. Allow the fabric paint to air cure for 24 hours, then use a dry iron with a press cloth and iron both sides at least 30 seconds to set the paint and make it dry cleanable and washable. If you have an older iron like this one from the 1950s, the advantage is that the bottom is completely flat with no holes, but a modern iron will do fine set on no steam. With ties, how it looks is more important than how it feels, so paint works well, especially on black because of the striking contrast. I hope this video was helpful. Please leave any questions, comments, or suggestions you have below in the comment section. And please subscribe and visit our Hartz Homestead channel to see our other videos on a variety of topics.